Well, hello again, guys, from here inside St James's Park, where Newcastle will be playing in the Champions League against Athletic Bilbao tomorrow night. But given they're ticking along nicely in that competition, that isn't going to be the subject of this video. Indeed, a couple of weeks back, I titled my video on this very same occasion ahead of a big Champions League night, "What's Up with Newcastle?" And I'm going to do the same again this time, albeit part two. That was on the back of the defeat down at Brighton. This time it's on the back of the defeat at West Ham. And we've just spoken to Eddie Howe and Dan Burn downstairs. Both were tremendous value, gave really good, considered, detailed, honest answers, and we'll go over what they've spoken about. But first of all, before we delve into West Ham and the fallout from it, and I think it is important, Eddie Howe didn't shy away from that, neither did Dan Burn. I want to give what is perhaps an asterisk to this analysis and everything going forward this season, and that is because it's one match, and it was a bad match. It was a very bad match. That's why we're going to talk about it. But before that, Newcastle had won 5 from 6 in all competitions. The Premier League is good. You know, West Ham might have been, of all the away games you could have asked for, to break that run that went back 8 matches since the last away day victory, West Ham would have been the one. They were given the perfect start with Jacob Murphy's goal inside 4 minutes, and we'll talk as to why they didn't build on that. But Premier League teams are good. They're better than what they'll face here tomorrow night, better than what they faced in Belgium, better than Benfica. So there's always got to be that understanding that any team at any point really can lose a Premier League game. I'm not trying to excuse things, but the bigger picture stuff. And I know there's a lot of anger out there, and some of it, and this can happen when an away game is on the television, and you know, a lot of people go online to vent their frustration, and that is fair. You know, a lot of what was said wasn't without reason, but also the bigger picture. Newcastle's summer was really damaging. The nature and the toxicity of everything around Alexander Isak and the protracted nature of it, what then that did for recruitment, what it did for Eddie Howe's ability to work with his team and the squad he wanted going into the season, and the good work he and his coach and staff can do. They were playing catch up from the word go, really. They started the season without a centre forward. Nick Woltemade was never the plan. That is not a criticism of Nick Woltemade. It's not even a criticism of them bringing him in eventually. They made the best of the situation they had. But they never saw themselves at the start of the summer, even halfway through the summer, bringing in a player of Nick Woltemade's profile. Because of all of that, I think there's huge mitigation going forward this season. It has been difficult. Eddie Howe's having to think on the job. His players are having to learn on the job. They're having to redraw the playbook. It's why we're going to see performances like we've seen away from home. It's a little bit easier back at St James's Park. You can paper over some of those cracks. You've got the feel good from the stands, the momentum on the pitch too. Away from home, it's been exposed, and it's been exposed week on week. And this was something I said to Eddie Howe in Friday's press conference. I think I mentioned it in my preview video. And Eddie Howe was dismissive, not in a disrespectful way, just in a way that he thought it would fall the other way. My point was, I see you away from home this season, and the best compliment I can give you is that you're instantly, over the 4 years of you being in charge, you're recognisable home and away. You play with the same traits, characteristics, shape, rhythm, partnerships, patterns, everything else. This season, away from home, I've seen a huge difference. Now, I think I touched on this in the preview video, Eddie's answer. He went back to the opening day of the season down at Aston Villa when they were very good. Okay, yes, they were. I said that at the time. I've said that repeatedly since. But since then, I've seen a deterioration in all of those things I've talked about in terms of patterns of play and partnerships and rhythm and everything else. Now, Eddie on Friday said that he could still see it in bits, and his belief was that they weren't far away and it would fall the other way and everything would come together and they would start replicating what they have done at home on the road. Well, what we saw on Sunday was no. It went in the opposite direction and everything went to pieces, everything went apart. And that was always my fear, that might happen. And let's look at the reasons for why. The place I think you've got to start is with Nick Woltemade. And I said there's got to be a degree of understanding when analysing Newcastle as a whole. This is not a criticism of Nick Woltemade. It's an observation, and I think it's a fair observation. And I touched on it earlier when I said Nick Woltemade wasn't the sort of profile of player they ever envisaged bringing in. By that, I mean his skill set, wonderfully skillful. He's been a joy to watch. He's worn the shirt, he's carried the load with charisma and bounce, and he's returned goals on the back of it, evidently and deservedly emerging as a cult hero. Not cult, cult indicates only a few. He's a He's a mass hero, and I know why. But I do think his style of play and his strengths, and I won't even call them weaknesses, I would actually say his strengths don't lend themselves to playing away from home with Newcastle, even though he has scored the great goal at USG and the wonderful flick down at Brighton. Now, what do I mean by that? What do I feel by that? At home, it's masked more because ordinarily you're playing with more territory, you're playing further up the pitch. Woltemade as a player who does like to drop deep into those number 10 pockets, but when he's making those flicks, invariably, they can be 18, 20 yards from goal. And some fans say to me, it's your new thing now, is it that Woltemade doesn't touch the ball enough inside the box? Well, yeah, it kind of is my new thing, and I think it's important. I think it's worthy analysis. At home, he is seeing the ball further up the pitch because Newcastle are playing further up the pitch. Away from home, a lot of what he does is actually on halfway, and when it doesn't come off, and when his hold-up play, which isn't necessarily the strongest, he's got those wonderful first-time layoffs, but when he's actually got to take a first touch, a second touch, and a third touch, he can lose the ball. He can be sometimes muscled out of it. That can then put the team under pressure. Away from home, I think his all-round game doesn't really lend itself to an away team, and by that I mean when they go 1-0 up on Sunday, Jacob Murphy scores, and Newcastle didn't actually start the game well. You can be tempted to say, they started well and they came off it. No, they didn't start well. Just Jacob Murphy scored a goal. It was a total anomaly in the game. If you've got Alexander Isak, Johan Wissa, a different type of player who was leading the line in that scenario, 1-0 up against a team at home where the fans are waiting to turn, they're low on confidence, they haven't won at home since February, they will play with a fear, I believe, a fear that it could become two because you've got that pace in behind of an Isak or Wissa or whoever it may be. But with Woltemade, because he does come deep to find the ball, because he doesn't play on the shoulder, he doesn't play high up the pitch, that then gives West Ham the encouragement, whoever it may be, and we've seen this, I think, in a lot of away games, for them to step out, for them to squeeze onto Newcastle's midfield, and in turn then the defence has got to drop deep. And that's what we saw on Sunday. Woltemade doesn't play with that fear factor running through the opposition. He does come into those deeper pockets, and with that, Newcastle found themselves on the back foot. They weren't able to pen West Ham in. It didn't really give them that platform then to build, and it wasn't really a surprise for me. Even though I wouldn't have done this, I think Nick Woltemade has shown that he can score goals, and he might just pop up at the right time. I probably still would have left him on, but I understood the substitution. I understood the want to put Newcastle higher up the pitch with someone like Willis Sula. Now, it didn't really work out, and none of the changes worked out on Sunday. Anthony Gordon came off, and we'll speak about him in just a second. I personally would have left Gordon on. I would have given him a rocket at half time and said you've got 15 minutes to prove something, or otherwise you're coming off. I wouldn't really have put Joe Linton, an out of form midfielder, at left wing. What then does that say for Harvey Barnes? And yes, Gordon hasn't really been good enough in the Premier League, but I don't think he's a horribly out of form player. Far from it. I think it's 5 goals in all competitions for club and country this season. He just needs to do it rather than under the bright lights of the Champions League. Do it on a sleepy, sedate Sunday in East London, or like it will be this Sunday in West London. That's what he's got to replicate, because I know there's a lot of noise around Gordon. He's been picked for every game for which he's been available in the Champions League or Premier League by Eddie Howe. That speaks to where he's at. I think he is in a good place. I don't have those wider concerns about him. I don't think he's necessarily far away. I also think he is impacted by not having, I know you don't like this guys talking about him, but having Isak there to bounce off. He really did bounce off Alexander Isak last season, as Jacob Murphy did on the opposite flank. They're still learning to play with Nick Woltemade. And as I said, at home, getting away with that is the wrong word, because they've played well at home. They've played magnificently well at home at times this season, but away, they haven't. They need to find a way to operate with Woltemade. And I would come back, before we go over anything and everything else, I think it does come back to the nature and the type of centre forward they've got in the team right now. That just doesn't lend itself to them being the team they want to be and the team they need to be away from home. Now, what else is up with Newcastle United? Well, when Eddie Howe made the changes at half time, he didn't see fit to bring on either of Anthony Elanga or Harvey Barnes when his team was chasing a goal. I think that speaks to where the head coach believes they are right now, going further back into midfield. I've said this so many times. In theory, on paper, that midfield three, and it's been called it often enough, is among the best in the Premier League on grass. They just don't do it enough. They don't do it consistently as a three. Sandro Tonali plays magnificently well every week. I thought he was okay on Sunday. Bruno Guimaraes didn't have a great game, suffering from a little bit of illness. Perhaps that was a little bit of mitigation on his part. But as a 3, when you go 1-0 up away from home like that, it's okay. Go on, you go and boss the midfield. That 3 should take control of the game, take the game by the scruff of the neck. And they don't do that, and they didn't do that. So I would look at the midfield as much as I look at those in attack as well. And I know I've started this analysis on Woltemade. Going back into defence, there's a lot of noise around Nick Pope, and I understand it with regards to distribution, but all of a sudden believing that Aaron Ramsdale is Glenn Hoddle, I think is a little short-sighted. Pope has been fantastic this season. He's been magnificent. It's why, and we'll get to the team Eddie's going to pick tomorrow night, it's why I think there'll be a show of faith in Nick Pope. Even though Aaron Ramsdale is a very good goalkeeper, and I wouldn't be massively against exploring that, but I do think some of the criticism and noise around Pope is extremely unfair. Likewise, Dan Burn. Dan Burn didn't have a good game on Sunday. Quite what he was thinking for the second goal, perhaps even he can't answer. But Dan Burn started the season brilliantly well at centre-half. He went to left-back. He continued to play well at left-back. Let us not believe that Dan Burn went to left-back and all of a sudden his form fell off the cliff. He didn't. He's played well. He's played very well. Yes, he's just said this to me downstairs. He's a different type of left-back or full-back to Kieran Trippier, Tino Livramento, Lewis Hall. But he's still playing well enough within himself, apart from Sunday. So I wouldn't go in too hard on Dan Burn either. The centre-backs, Malik Chow, actually did okay. Sven Botman, I don't think there's a great deal massively wrong whereby you would look at it and say, right, okay, rip that up. You had 5-6 changes. And that was what he spoke to us about in the press conference just now, the dilemma he's got coming back here tomorrow night. Does he change it up? Does he say, well, no, 4 or 5 of you were nowhere near good enough, I'm going to make changes, give others a chance to impress? Or does he say, actually, you were the ones who played like you did on Sunday, go out and prove something, to give them that opportunity to right those wrongs? And I think he might do that with a few, and I would think that would be sensible. Leave Anthony Gordon in the team. But Eddie said, he said Sunday wasn't about physicality. What they failed was a mental test. And this spoke to what Dan Burn mentioned with us downstairs, where he said he knows Newcastle will turn up tomorrow night. Beneath the lights, the crowd will be buzzing, those on the pitch will be buzzing, they'll be up for it, they'll go at it. He said, that's all well and good, but it's West Ham away, it's Brentford away, when you go and earn your money, when you've got to turn up. And I just thought that was such a brave, honest point for him to make. And likewise, Eddie as well said, now isn't the time for riot acts. It's never the time for riot acts with him. It's a time to be considered and to be calm and to pick through in an analytical, clever, erudite way rather than just shouting and bawling. That makes yourself feel better. And if you remember after the Brentford game last season away, when Newcastle were awful, and Howe then of all the occasions might have been tempted to go in and throw the proverbial teacup, he wasn't. He was calm, he let his players go off, and I think they had a Christmas weekend away. By the time they then got back to Benton, he was ready there waiting with all of the analysis to pick through everything. They then subsequently went on a 10-game winning run, don't forget, that made the season, that took them towards the Carabao Cup final, that took them towards that top 5 Champions League finish. Why they're back here tomorrow night. And I would back them to do the same again. Like I said at the very top of the video, I would give them that degree of understanding, but they are good enough. They have got good enough players. They've got enough talent. They've got enough character to go and right that wrong. And while they've got this game here against Bilbao tomorrow night, they'll probably go and win it. I expect they will do. It's Brentford I'm going to save my verdict and my analysis and everything in terms of that response for. That is the one they've got to now go and win. But tomorrow night will absolutely still give us a clue collectively and individually as to that response, given the fallout on the back of Sunday. So I've spoken long enough now about a game that wasn't very good and wasn't very enjoyable. Eddie Howe and Dan Burn both called the subsequent analysis of it painful. Well, let's hope for you guys tomorrow night won't be that. And I don't think it will. They've shown themselves in the Champions League this season to be that big team. They really have turned up in this competition. Even in the game against Barcelona, the one which they lost for the first half hour, they were magnificent. I expect them to come out tomorrow night and be better than Athletic Bilbao, and that would put them perhaps only 3 points away from almost guaranteeing that 12-point mark, which is enough to take you through to at least the extra playoff round. So, guys, below the line, tell me, I'm going to put a little comment at the very top there in terms of my opinions and my take on Nick Woltemade. Is that fair? I don't want it to be seen as a criticism of at all. I love everything about him, what I've seen so far. I just think in the context of the team, they are still struggling a little bit to get there in terms of how to work out how to play with him and without the type of player Alexander Isak was and Yoane Wissa will be. Don't underestimate the impact of that Wissa injury as well. So coming out of this summer, it has been difficult. I certainly, for one, am prepared to give them several passes this season going forward, even though Sunday was pretty bad. So yeah, guys, hit like, comment, subscribe, interact, and I'll see you. I'm actually sitting in the stands tomorrow night, so my reflections on my video will come to you on Thursday morning. So, okay, enjoy, guys. Bye-bye.